Hospitals will be published, including Leeds General Infirmary and Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, where Savile had extensive access. The abuse was allegedly carried out over a period of 50 years. The reports are expected to show how opportunities to stop Savile were missed. More than 100 people have given evidence to these inquiries. Some now want assurances such abuse can never happen again. Our health correspondent Branwen Jeffries has this report.
Jimmy Savile, family entertainer and serial sexual offender. He used his fame to raise money for NHS hospitals and his celebrity status to gain access as a volunteer, helping out as a porter and sometimes on the wards. Now the NHS faces questions about the access it gave Savile. More than 100 people have come forward to give evidence to these inquiries, sharing details of sexual assaults or inappropriate behaviour. Lawyers say too often warning signs were overlooked.
Because he was such an important fundraiser for the organisation, and in some cases people were literally laughed off by members of staff. And these were children, some of whom did try and tell their parents, and their parents just could not believe that someone as famous as Savile would have behaved in this way.
Savile was also given an official role by the NHS at Broadmoor. He led a task force at the high-security psychiatric hospital. So did his fame blind some parts of the NHS to the risks? Today, the Health Secretary is expected to acknowledge mistakes and apologise to those the Health Service had a duty to protect, but who instead were exposed to a sexual predator. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News.
Richard Scorer, a lawyer for some of Savile's alleged victims, said he wants to see a change in the law to ensure complaints of abuse are dealt with thoroughly.
The scale of the abuse by Savile is obviously shocking and horrific and appalling, and what's even more appalling, of course, is that many of the victims complained at the time. There were many instances of people complaining, and those complaints were often dismissed and belittled, and I think what we need to come out from this with is a change in the law to ensure that where complaints are made, they are dealt with properly. One of our clients, for example, who was a teenager when she was assaulted by Savile at Leeds General Infirmary, tried to tell the nurses about that, and her complaints were dismissed. So it's exactly that kind of thing that we need to deal with differently in the future.
What do you think we're going to learn today?
Well, I think we're going to learn more about the scale of it. I think we hopefully will get the truth of what occurred, both the abuse that occurred and the complaints that were made. I hope we get an apology to the victims on that, but most of all, I hope we get a change in the law so that when people do make complaints, it is mandatory for those complaints to be reported to the police.
So that's the key thing, isn't it? Mandatory reporting, because procedures clearly have been tightened up, but if that was to happen, that could avoid the sorts of scenarios where Savile went unreported for decades.
There's absolutely no doubt that if we'd had a mandatory reporting law, Savile would have been stopped in his tracks much earlier. The complaints that were made would have been dealt with properly, and we wouldn't be in this position now.
Since Savile's activities came to public attention, obviously we've asked periodically about the support system that's in place for victims, for alleged victims. What's your opinion on that? Is there enough support in place for people who were in these hospitals who came into contact with Savile?
I think there are very real concerns that there is not sufficient support for people who have suffered abuse, whether it's from Savile or anybody else. There are cutbacks at the moment in those support services, and of course that's happening at a time when the number of people coming forward in relation to past sexual abuse is growing. So that's an issue we have to look at as well, but that in a sense is about picking up the pieces after the abuse has occurred. What we need to do even more than that is make sure that the abuse never happens in the first place, and mandatory reporting is key to that.
Richard Scorer speaking to me just a short time ago, and we'll be bringing you this morning's news conference from Kate Lampard QC on those reports from the 28 hospitals live here on BBC News from 10 o'clock this morning.